Hey, welcome back, everybody. FearTalk 16B, mean being probably better than A. We're not sure, but here is Jarrett Krentzel again. We're back to talk about nature, fear, education, children. As I remember, that was kind of one of the themes. And then we sort of talked about coming from perspective of me, ourself, coming from perspective of Coyote, coming from perspective of something beyond us, which we could even call, the cosmos, so that there's many voices involved in this conversation. And I would actually at some point make sure we talk about Coyote.
Yes, I was going to do the same. I'm glad you went right there.
So we've had a few conversations over the last couple of weeks since we did part A, and we really have no plan of where we're going tonight, folks. So hang in there with us. I just know that we're walking a path. Jarrett's walked a path. He spent 6 months walking a path in the Appalachian Trail and the forest and above the forest line and back down to the city, and had that a huge experience, which I just read his book. Just a little plug worth making.
Oh, thank you, Michael.
So that really enriches, I think, our conversation and connection. And you do talk about fear a fair amount in the book. You actually use the word fearlessness at one point. You talk a lot about love. And so those are just like some nice things on the hors d'oeuvres for our plan tonight that isn't a plan of no plan. Where would we like to go as we pick up conversation from last time? Anywhere, anything for you jumping out?
Yes, certainly. Well, first, I just want to say, Michael, thanks for welcoming me back. Yeah, it's been 3 weeks since part A, and lots has happened in life, lots of changes. You and I have had many of different conversations since then, in person, through email, on the phone. I just texted you for the first time. Next, maybe we'll smoke signal each other. That might be more appropriate.
Right. And so just the in-person was that you invited me up to come and speak to some people, your staff here, and for an hour and a half or so up in where your neck of the woods. And that was a very interesting experience as well. So thank you.
You're welcome. It sure was. It was equally interesting for us all. You immediately brought up the coyote, and I'm so happy you did, because when I watched part A, I watched it as if I was a viewer, not knowing anything about me or you or fear or the coyote or anything, and just watched it with a real open mind and heart. And the one thing that stood out is, what's this coyote that these two are talking about? So I'm glad you went there right away. And
I could just hear the 5-year-old sitting in the classroom and saying, "How come you're not talking about coyote? You mentioned coyote."
Well, the thing is, the 5-year-olds, they don't know about the coyote, right? The coyote is it's the sneaky trickster animal. It's the coyote. It's the coyote mentoring approach that we use so often in our program, especially in our early years program, when we're working with and playing with children from 2 to 5 years old. The coyote is the trickster. And so using that mentoring approach as the educator, and there's lots to coyote mentorship, but just a real simple peek into what the approach and the philosophy is all about. The educator is the trickster. The coyote is the trickster animal. And so it's the educator's job to trick the children into their own learning process. So real simple example. Just this morning, we're out on the beach with a group of children, and a child picks up a shell, doesn't know what it is, holds it up to me and asks, "What is this?" Now, as an age appropriate educator, especially working with early years children, for me to say, "Oh, that's a clamshell and these are its properties," that's great information, but it typically closes the conversation down. And so to engage the child in curiosity and wonder and imagination and connectivity, rather than me answering any of those questions, the coyote is merely holding up this mirror and reflecting those questions right back at the child. I don't know. What is it? Where did you find it? What does it feel like? What does it smell like? What does it sound like? And so pulling out all these descriptive words that the child has within them and coming up with a name. It's the oval brown stinky shell. Well, that's it. It's the oval brown stinky shell. And let's go on an oval brown stinky shell treasure hunt. Let's see how many we can find. And so that's the coyote approach. It's tricking the child into their own connectivity with nature, because now they've named it, they've smelt it, they've figured out the properties of this shell. And so that furthers and deepens their connection.
How has the child been tricked that they
Hmm.
need a trick?
Yeah, how's a child been tricked? Well, I know what the shell is. I've grown up with the shell. I could name it, give it its properties, tell you how it feeds and all the rest. So I'm tricking the child in like, this is the first time I'm seeing this as well. I have no idea. Let's figure this out together. And so the tricking in that particular situation is just me being playfully ignorant.
Okay, that's another word for it. Great.
Mm-hmm.
I still want to get to how has the child already been tricked? That you then have to bring a trick to the child, to get that open learning. And I'm guessing, so where I was going with it, just to be short, the child's already been conditioned, perhaps, and often I hear it too. What's this? They're waiting for an adult name. Does that make sense? So there's a bit of a trick there for the child to find the code that makes them satisfy the adult in the adult's language of naming, which naming is so powerful, as you well know, in our language. And so what you are doing, and I think I hear this from an indigenous critique, they often say, we don't have a lot of nouns in our language. So they don't have those quick names. What they have is understanding of connection first. So using verbs, using adjectives, using descriptors, a different language than the noun language. So I feel like the child's already been tricked into a noun language, especially in the modern contemporary world. And what the trickster is actually doing is tricking the trick.
Yeah, and what you just said, I would need some time to really think about it, but my immediate go-to thought there is the child has been tricked in believing that adults have all the answers. And so there I am. I'm an adult, so I must know all.
And you're full of nouns and names. You have such a huge vocabulary. It's a dictionary, walking dictionary. It's easy. What's that, right? They don't want to go through the dictionary.
Yeah. And so through that trickery,
yeah,
it kind of levels the playing field. It brings, here's the child, here's me, the child's looking up at me, they know all the answers. What's this? I don't know. What is that? And then there we are, we meet each other right where we are. And
beautiful.
so we both don't know. And so I think that, yeah, that I've never really thought of it that way. Thank you, Mikhail. It's not only providing an opportunity for the child to connect with that thing that they're engaged and interested in, but it's the continuation and the deepening of our relationship, although it's sponsored by a trick.
So I think there's also an inquiry that we're interested in. That's what makes education so interesting, is that where's the inquiry, right? So anytime we do a quick naming, especially if the child gives up to the adult to have the power to name, it often can stop the inquiry, not necessarily, but it can kind of contain it to a place where maybe that's not the best way for learning, right? It's like you too quick get the container, then we get all the kind of other data. And so some educator could pull out a book and even show, oh, see, here's the map of where this species is found. And all of a sudden the child's like, all their imagination, that magical world that we know young children, certainly at least up to 7, are living in a quite different state of consciousness than the rational adult mind. And eventually they sort of start cueing into that other state of consciousness, much more, quote, rational, self-centered ego. But yeah, in that early time, I think we're trying to keep the inquiry open. But I also want to just point, let's just see if we can go a little deeper on this, tricking the trick.
Let's do it.
It's just coming to me that I'm going, oh, yeah, okay. So another reason the child wants to get that adult power. What is this? Going to the adult for strength and power, because it's an unequal power relation and they know it in the cultural world. And so wanting to access a certain power or privilege of knowledge, get on the good side of the teacher, whatever it might be special, right? And so on. One argument there underneath where I'm curious is that can also be a curiosity they have when they ask the question, what is this? Actually, they're operating on a fear of not getting it right, what it is. The fear of not getting the right answer. Let's make sure I ask. Think of doing a math question. How often, children, how do you do this? How do how you do this? And we like say, well, you'll figure it out. Well, why are they going? How do you do this? Why are they doing that in the first place? Is there a deep fear of not getting it right? And then they know that that somehow can be, or they've already learned or been some condition to, it's not cool to get it wrong. Failure. So we enter the fear domain.
Yes, good. Yeah, you got us there quickly. Nice. Well, I think what you're touching upon is also age appropriateness has to be taken into account here, because for the earlier sector especially, they really don't know. A lot of the treasures that they're finding in the forest and on the beach with us, this is the first time they've ever seen it. And so they're really honestly asking, what is this? This is brand new. Now, getting into the elementary school years, middle school and high school, there is where I think the fear of the unknown, or the fear of not knowing the answer, or the fear of being mistaken, I think that sets in, because at that point, from kindergarten on, and certain preschools, but really traditionally from kindergarten on, they're being taught what that is. And they're being taught to memorize what that is.
And within a competitive frame of who's going to learn it first, who's got it, who doesn't got it. That's power. That's capital power.
That's that's schooling. Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, that was a general comment I made, but sure. I mean, the educational institution is, it's the training ground for the economical war that we all enter into. And it's, yeah, the children, our students, they're in training to fight that economical war. So it is a battle, it is a competition, and sure, there's a lot of fear there.
Okay, so you walked out, you were 20 something, early 2002. 24, 25?
I think I was, yeah, somewhere around there, 22, 23.
You walked out of that competitive economic war of the world, and you went on this long journey, and you walked a path. Can you tell what happened on that path as you walked out of that kind of a world? This, let's call it a fear-based, capitalist, competitive world.
Yeah.
And you went on a journey not knowing where you're going. You knew where you're going on the path, but you certainly didn't know why you were going. I think you say over and over, I'm not sure why, I just know I need to do this.
Yeah, that was it. It was a deep calling. I didn't know I didn't know what my reasons were for going. I knew for sure what my reasons were for leaving. And I
Nice.
think that's all that really mattered, just to get me to take that first step onto the trail, onto that Appalachian Trail. In hindsight, when I look back, and I think we talked about this in part A, a lot of it was just running away. It was a running away from the absurdities of our civilization, or at least what I considered absurd at the time, and not wanting to subscribe or be a part of any of it at any level. But, what does that mean? So, I'm on a Greyhound bus, I got a backpack, I got my hiking boots, I'm still plugged in, but it surely felt, at least the travel down to the trail, that I was starting to unplug. And as I continued to walk the Appalachian Trail, I just continued to unplug, physically unplug, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And then it wasn't about leaving or running away anymore. It was, and it wasn't even about walking towards anything other than the northern terminus of the trail, the end point, Mount
Sure.
Katahdin.
Sure.
But I didn't really, I cared about getting there, but it was there for me when I was ready to get there. There was no need to rush it. So what the trail eventually became for me was a place where I had unplugged to a point of meditation, where I was just simply being. I had very little thought at the time. Well, that's not true. It was, yeah.
You were writing in your journal, so day by day kind of thing. So it's not like you didn't have thoughts and that kind of thing.
No, that's true. I stand corrected. There were a ton of epiphanies, a ton of realization. It was shifted thought, shifted feeling. Everything was everything.
Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah. So here it is. I'm essentially, this is from your book, page 118.
Oh.
He says, I'm not sure, why I'm on this trail at some level. I know what I'm leaving, but here I'm going, and I'm going to suggest, you knew inside somewhere. You just may not have known,
Oh, I believe that.
Here, because boy, it really comes out in your book. I'm essentially, this is day 95, journal entry. I'm essentially being the love inside us all. And getting in touch with my true self out here. I'm communicating with myself and finally acting. I'm making one with myself, expressing myself, not being afraid of myself.
Ooh, I got chills hearing that.
My metaphor, as you know, a little bit of my theory, between love and fear, is these seemingly polar opposites, is the path of fearlessness. And so when I hear you walking a path, going from a very fear-based, competitive, economic world, as we talked about, you already were guided to go to love. And you walk the path of fearlessness to get there. That's a quick take on your story, not to minimize the complexity.
No, it doesn't minimize at all. It in fact maximizes. I very much relate to what you're saying. It was completely fearless, that journey. Well, not completely. The very first night on that Appalachian Trail, I cried and I questioned myself. What am I doing? Why am I out here? I was scared. Like I said in part A, that was my first backpacking trip. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know where I was going. I was in the middle of the southern Appalachian Mountains in Georgia.
Oh yeah, huge. Never backpacked before.
Oh yeah, sleeping in a tent.
Got all this equipment. Okay, somehow it'll all work out.
Yeah, hearing the rustling of the leaves in the evening, and in the dark, and all of it.
Okay.
And then I just have to share this with you, Michael. And then the sun rose and the birds started to sing and my eyes opened up. And I just felt like I survived what was a very frightening evening for me.
Mm.
And I packed up my tent, I made my breakfast, filtered some water, drank it, put my backpack on, and it was like, okay, I'm here. I'm going to do this. That I did that last night. I overcame something, and I didn't feel a single inkling of fear for that entire trail. I was just wide open to the full experience.
You do talk about feeling afraid one night along the trip when you're, isn't it nice to be reminded by somebody who's freshly read your book and you're going, oh, I forgot that. But I'm fresh. This is 20 years ago.
Good.
You wrote this 20
Yes.
years ago, so I don't blame you.
That's right.
Yeah,
It's been a
it's a long
while.
time. Anyway, there was one night you were alone in a campsite because you've been traveling with a lot of walkers, fellow friends on the trail, and there was one night you actually talk about being quite scared going through being alone, and you had to confront aloneness in a new way.
Oh,
And
yes.
it didn't happen again after that. It seems it was just that kind of one good shot.
Yeah. Thanks for reminding me of that, Michael. And that was, yeah, I was on the trail, but my fearful thoughts was about back home,
Oh,
back
okay.
in society.
Okay.
I wasn't there with my thoughts.
Okay.
When I was on the trail and I was there with all the nature, it was totally fearless. But yeah, that moment, and I'll have to reread that, but I forget what crept in or what kickstarted that, but it got me thinking about culture. And
Okay. I don't think that comes through in the writing of the book, as I remember.
Yeah, probably.
It was more that nobody was at that campsite, at the stop site, and you'd been around a lot of people for quite a while, and you kind of got the full force of some kind of aloneness. But I no doubt that is probably exactly what was going on. Is you started thinking about, because you had a lot of space, right? Nobody to kind of talk to and jive with in the present.
Totally. Yeah.
So yeah, you had an experience. I'm going to suggest that when you cried that first night, let's just play with this a bit. And this, and you said, I overcame something through the night, through the sleeping. Perhaps there was dreaming involved in that. And then the sun rises and something happens and the day begins and the birds are all there. And I'm going to just suggest that you got trickstered in that night by Coyote in the form of the natural teachers. Natural teachers who tricked you that, you don't know what you're doing. The first time I hiked, notice where all the tension's going. The tension's going to the deficit, rather than when you welcomed what was already present. The teacher was already there. That is one thought I have, that in some way you were trickstered yourself, and you're tricked outside of your fear-based pattern of thinking, which this world has taught you very carefully about who you are and what you are, and being afraid of yourself. And that's what you say on page 118. I came to realize I was not afraid of myself anymore. And then, of course, you talked about just being able to experience love in a whole new way. So this is why it's so important in my thinking to really utilize fear as a major teacher. So how is Coyote, and I'm going to just give a little sense of my idea of Coyote. It's an archetype that's been with me for a long time. Now, I haven't used it exactly in the way you do, but I do totally get it, that is important. What I found about Coyote, as I did a little reflecting on it this week, was Coyote is the wonderful adaptive species, so close to a dog, but does not get domesticated as a dog by humans. Rarely, if ever. And how can this wildly wonderful ready to domesticate animal, because humans have domesticated dogs for probably hundreds of thousands of years, way back. And I'm going, you come so close, and yet, no, you're not gonna domesticate me. But hey, Coyote comes and says, hey, I really like you guys. You build farms and you put chickens on them. You guys are pretty cool. I like hanging out with you dudes. And not only that, you build all these structures which I can hide behind and dig under and then sneak up on my prey. I like the humans so much.
Mhm.
So much. And then always back to the wild, always the trick. Oh, looks like a friend. Oh, yeah, well, you're wild. We're not going to domesticate you. You're not going to be a nice puppy to pat. I loved watching coyotes. When I was a teenager, I'd go up into these hills that were in the city, right? That's where you see coyotes, amazing a number of coyotes in the cities where I grew up. And they're so beautiful and they're so clever to just sneak in the margins, never getting caught fully in the domestic, always creating the wild. And I believe that they're a teacher for us as humans. Okay, so you're domesticated, fine, that's not all bad, but don't get fully caught in being domesticated. You're wild too. You're wild like us. So coyote to me is a great teacher for keeping that loop, right? Domesticated wild, back to the domesticated wild. Any thoughts on that, Jarrett?
Nothing immediately coming to mind, but I do love how you describe the coyote. Yeah, living on the fringe of the world, but always in the earth, always with nature. That nature is its home. The world is almost its playground, a place where it comes to play, to even work a little bit, but never integrates and never fully a part of. Yeah, yeah.
So that's coyote mentoring from the angle of the coyote. It's a coyote mentoring from the angle of the biological domesticate kind of juxtaposition, wild domestic. And the kind of coyote mentoring I hear you're doing is another kind of mentoring. It's just mentoring to not let the child get completely domesticated in nouns and language and concepts. That's not knowledge. That's like that much knowledge.
Right. Yeah.
Even though it's seductive, right?
It is. Yeah. And it allows for them, especially the earlier children, it allows for them to get in touch with their own personal knowledge. It allows them to understand who they are.
Okay.
It gives them an opportunity for them to get to know themselves. And through that, self-confidence gets built, and self-trust and self-respect and self-love comes out of all those teachings.
Yeah, nice. And that was when you used the word connectivity, right? Connecting to the shell that the adult's holding, rather than the adult teacher delivering the knowledge, actually disconnects in a certain way from the child really coming to the object of knowing or interest, rather than just pouring it off and getting the knowledge going one way onto the child, as accumulated knowledge. And so inquiry, I think, was a term that I just emphasized. That's inquiry-based learning in a nutshell.
Inquiry-based learning, absolutely.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, we have about 10 minutes and we're going to get shut off by our magical Zoom machine. What do we want to go at next for this last sort of 8-9 minutes here?
Well, I can't say. I don't know. Nothing is immediately coming to mind.
Okay, what if I tricked you? What if I tricked you into something? Okay.
I'm up for the challenge. Let's do it.
Would you close your eyes for a few minutes? And I welcome the viewers also to close their eyes. I'm just going to do a little guided tour. So we're watching out our window, wherever we might be, at the street, the sidewalk, cars going by the street. Typical city. And all of a sudden we hear in the background all these voices, children's voices, laughing, shouting, playing. They're coming down the street, getting closer, getting closer. And they're right in front and they're loud and you hear them, the whole group. Sometimes you might hear one of the caregivers making some comments. And you open your eyes. And as you open your eyes, you see the children are all in this line. And it's got a huge tether of this big strap going down the middle from one caregiver to the other at the other end. And all the children are coming off of a strap attached to that main strap, and they're all holding it with one hand, and they're all walking to the park at the end of the block. Okay, if you just open your eyes now. What have we just watched? What have we just experienced? I saw this the other day, and I happen to know the children that were tethered.
Well, are you asking me what I saw or what I felt seeing that?
I'm trying to trick you, see, so it's really more important just anything that you start sharing and I'll come in.
Yeah. Well, being one who is involved with a lot of site assessment and risk assessment, my immediate headspace goes to, this has obviously been thought to mitigate risks and hazards, keep the children safe and comfortable. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I realize the benefits of it, but I also realize the shortcomings of it as well. It's the crutch. It's a simple, quick, easy solution to get the children all together in a line, moving from point A to point B. No one gets lost. Everyone's together. But it doesn't honor the child in any way. For the most part, it doesn't teach the child how to travel as a group and how to be responsible for one's own safety and one's own self and the responsibility of others. It just teaches that child to hold on to the rope, which is a disconnected learning outcome from what that experience could potentially provide. I mean, what a wonderful opportunity to spend the time and the space and the energy to teach children how to safely walk together as a group in an urban center, which, it's very risky, and depending on the type of educator, some educators are totally comfortable with that, and others it's stepping way out of their comfort zone. So yeah, to put that work in the beginning, even if you don't get to point B, even if you just take a few steps out of point A, doesn't seem like we're ready. Let's come back to point A and gather. Let's talk about what happened. Let's give this another try at a later time.
Nice.
All right, we're going to try this. And then let's get a little bit further.
Oh, I love it. I love it. You know, we have
And
this notion of developmental appropriate, developmental readiness in education. You know,
mhm,
you can just see you're doing a kind of developmental readiness for moving from A to B.
mhm,
So that A to
totally.
B is not just a functional shift. Then we get there and then we do our education or our nature education and so on. I
Yeah.
love the back looping. You remember in the workshop, I kept saying, I'd like to see our trail walking move in loops
Mhm,
rather than the zzz.
mhm,
And one of the reasons I would argue, we got 2 minutes left here, Jared, is that a fear-based form, when form itself follows fear. So the actual form of transport, these children transporting their learning as well, because we're also transporting them as little learning beings, and the
mhm,
educators, right? They're just like a little learning being. We're transporting them in a form that follows fear. And it's not fear being accountable to and engaged with form that is actually natural, working in natural principles and very intelligent systems of this whole connectivity that you talked about. So I'm interested in forms of connectivity first, then
mhm,
forms of fear that follow fear are going to come in because they're going to be challenging on that more
mhm.
forms of connectivity. So we have 1 minute left. We could talk so many times, but this is 16B winding itself up. We have a minute and a bit. Um, I just want to say that, you know, you had a great experience of love on your journey. It's so clear from your book. In the 20s, you're now living a life, um, 20 years later, and all the complexities
Mhm.
of living in the world. And we know this great phrase, you know, be in the world but not of it. Well, how's it been?
In 1 minute, less than a minute.
Less than a minute.
It's been everything. It's been scary, exciting, loving, hating, full, starving, full of songs, it's everything. It's all extremes and everything in between. And truthfully, I sit here tired, busy, busy in good things, but busy, and very full with what my life is like on a day-to-day basis, family life, work life, all of it.
Yep.
And I wouldn't have it any other way.
Mhm. That's